A young billionaire saw a homeless girl rummaging through the trash. He gave her money, but when she took his hand, she said, "You abandoned me." The alarm went off at 5 in the morning, but Victor Lancaster was already awake. Lying in his king-size bed, he stared at the glass ceiling in his penthouse, where the stars still flickered faintly against the dark sky. He didn't need an alarm. His body had long been used to the relentless schedule he'd kept for years. "Good morning, Mr. Lancaster. Outside temperature, 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Today's schedule: meeting with investors at 8 a.m., lunch with the board at 12 p.m., video conference with Tokyo at 3 p.m. The electronic voice echoed through the bedroom as the curtains automatically slid open, revealing a panoramic view of the city still waking up below. Victor rose in a swift motion. At 20, he was already Silicon Valley's youngest CEO, presiding over a fortune that most people couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes. In his private gym on the 30th floor, Victor ran on the treadmill while mentally reviewing the company's figures. Nexus Tech, his creation, had revolutionized the artificial intelligence market, skyrocketing from a promising startup to a corporate giant in just 3 years. The college dropout prodigy now owned an empire worth billions. After a quick shower, Victor put on the tailored suit his assistant had chosen for him. In his private elevator, he checked his phone, dozens of messages, all urgent, all demanding his immediate attention. "Mr. Lancaster, your coffee is ready, and your driver is waiting," his assistant Megan announced the moment he stepped into the minimalist dining room. Victor just nodded, picking up his coffee cup and ignoring the rest of the elaborate breakfast the chef had prepared. He had no time to eat. Time was money, and he wasted neither. In the armored car on his way to the office, Victor looked at the company's stock price, up another 3% since yesterday. His personal fortune had grown by an additional $42 million while he slept. Figures that had stopped meaning anything to him long ago, just digits on a screen. "We have the revised proposal for acquiring Quantum Systems," said his CFO, Robert, the moment Victor entered the top-floor conference room of the Nexus Tech skyscraper. Around the table, 6 men in expensive suits waited anxiously for his words. They were all at least 2 decades older, all eager to please the billionaire who was barely out of his teens. "Their terms aren't good enough. Offer 15% less and remove the condition that their current team must remain. If they refuse, we'll build a competing product and force them out of the market within 6 months." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. No one questioned him. Victor had earned that right after repeatedly turning his ideas into gold. The day went by like every other. Meetings, decisions that affected thousands of lives, numbers, strategies, and more numbers. Victor didn't eat lunch. He drank a protein shake while reviewing contracts. There was no time for breaks. At 8 in the evening, when most of the executives had already gone home, Victor was still in his office, working on a new algorithm. The view of the city lights through the glass walls no longer impressed him. It was merely the backdrop to another workday. "Mr. Lancaster, your dinner with Ms. Palmer is scheduled for 9, Megan reminded him through the intercom. Victor frowned, trying to recall who Palmer was. Oh, right. The model he'd met at last week's product launch party. He had asked his team to set something up, as he usually did whenever he met someone who caught his eye. Cancel it? Tell her something urgent came up. That night, like many others, Victor returned alone to his high-tech mansion. The automation system turned on the lights and adjusted the temperature as soon as he walked in. Soft classical music began to play, a carefully programmed relax after a productive day routine. Victor poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey and wandered through the empty rooms of the enormous house. Rooms decorated by famous interior designers that never hosted visitors. Guest rooms that never welcomed guests, an infinity pool overlooking the ocean in which he never swam. In his personal study, he opened his laptop and kept working. More ideas, more projects, more money to accumulate. The silence of the mansion was broken only by the sound of his fingers typing on the keyboard. For a moment, he stopped and looked around. He had everything he'd ever wanted, or at least what he thought he wanted. Yet something felt wrong. Something was missing. Victor shook his head and went back to work. That unsettling feeling would show up sometimes, a void that no multi-million-dollar acquisition could fill. It was easier to ignore it, throwing himself into more work, more achievements. His phone rang, one of the directors calling to report a problem with an important client. Victor gave precise instructions, solving the issue in minutes. He was good at that, solving problems, creating solutions, making things run smoothly. That was why he was so successful. But solving the emptiness inside, that was one problem neither money nor intelligence seemed capable of fixing. At midnight, Victor finally went to bed, alone as always. Tomorrow would be another day just like this one. More millions to earn, more companies to manage, more of the world to conquer. And maybe, just maybe, one more day ignoring that persistent question. Why Fionn having it all? Did he feel nothing? The rain showed no sign of stopping as Victor stepped out of Le Ciel. The exclusive restaurant was emptying as the night went on, but the maître still rushed over to assist. "Shall I call your driver, Mr. Lancaster?" "No, thanks. I'll walk a bit." Victor accepted the offered umbrella and stepped out into the night. The cold air on his face was a relief after spending hours in the restaurant's controlled environment. Another successful business dinner, another acquisition, more money. The same routine as always. The financial district streets were nearly deserted. Only a few pedestrians hurried by, trying to escape the downpour. Victor walked slowly, allowing scattered thoughts to drift through his mind. His phone vibrated in his pocket, his assistant, undoubtedly checking where he was. He ignored it. Without noticing, he drifted away from the brightly lit avenues. He turned onto a side street where the lights were dimmer and the buildings less imposing. It was astonishing how, just 2 blocks away from one of the city's most expensive restaurants, everything could look so different. That was when he spotted her. Between 2 dumpsters, a small figure was rummaging through the discarded trash from a nearby restaurant. A girl, no older than 10, with dark hair sticking to her face in the rain. She wore baggy, worn-out clothes, completely drenched. Victor halted, watching her. The girl was systematic, checking each box and bag carefully. There was something almost professional about her method, as if it were a daily chore. A strange feeling grew inside Victor. His company donated millions to charity every year, and he attended fancy galas, posed for photographs with underprivileged children. But this was different. It was real, with no filters or intermediaries. The girl found something, a half-eaten sandwich, and tucked it into a plastic bag tied around her waist. Only then did she notice he was watching her. Her large, dark eyes locked on him, showing no embarrassment, just the caution of someone who had learned to be wary. Without overthinking, Victor took a step closer. The girl moved back, alert. Victor pulled out his wallet and took out some bills. He didn't check the amount, maybe $100, maybe $1,000. Money had long since become meaningless figures. "Here," he said, extending the cash in her direction. "For food." The girl eyed the money warily, then glanced back at Victor, as though gauging the threat he might pose. After a seemingly endless moment, she inched closer. Victor reached his arm out further to offer her the money. The girl slowly extended her hand and took it. Her fingers brushed his for an instant. In that brief contact, something inexplicable happened. The girl gripped his hand with surprising strength. Her eyes, now firmly locked on his, seemed to bore into his soul when she spoke. "You abandoned me." The words jolted Victor like an electric shock. He felt the air rush out of his lungs, his heart pounding. The world around him blurred, the rain, the city lights. Everything seemed far away. Confusion was all over Victor's face. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, unable to form words. He stared at the girl, as if trying to crack an unsolvable puzzle. Why did that phrase, spoken by a complete stranger, hit him so hard? Why was there a sharp pain in his chest, as if a buried memory had been triggered? There was something about the girl's face, something profoundly familiar. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes, the slight furrow in her brow. It felt like looking at a faded photograph of someone he was supposed to know but couldn't recall. Before Victor could regain his composure or muster any question, the girl released his hand. With quick reflexes, she shoved the money into her pocket and stepped back. "Wait," Victor managed, his voice faltering. "Who are you?" But the girl was already running. disappearing into the dark city alleys. Within seconds, she was gone, swallowed by the rainy night. Victor stood there, arms still outstretched. The rain drenched him, but he hardly noticed. His mind whirled, trying to process what had just happened. "You abandoned me." The words echoed in his head. Why had they triggered that reaction? Why was his heart racing? Why did he feel that heavy weight, that inexplicable guilt? Disconnected fragments of memory threatened to surface. A long, dim corridor, the smell of disinfectant, a small hand in his own, and then nothing. A gap he couldn't fill. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him partly back to reality. Victor ignored it. Tomorrow's meetings, the ongoing negotiations, the millions in his bank account. None of it mattered now. Walking with slow, uncertain steps, Victor headed toward where the girl had disappeared. He knew it was useless. She was long gone. But he felt compelled to try, as if something vital depended on it. Who was that girl? Why did her words affect him so deeply? What did that accusation mean? And why, although he was certain they'd never met, right, did he feel such an unsettling connection? Victor paused at the mouth of a dark alley, unsure. The rain was easing up now, becoming a light drizzle. Drops ran down his face, mingling with the cold sweat on his forehead. He had to find her again. He needed to understand what had happened. He needed to find out why a street girl's words had shaken the foundations of his carefully ordered world. Slowly, he returned to the main avenue, his body on autopilot as his mind reeled. He knew he wouldn't sleep that night. He knew something essential had changed. He knew his life, so orderly and predictable until then, had just been turned upside down by 5 simple words. "You abandoned me." The morning after the encounter, Victor couldn't focus. Sitting in his glass-walled office atop Nexus Tech, he gazed out over the city without really seeing it. The girl's words echoed in his mind. "You abandoned me." By late afternoon, he cancelled all remaining meetings and returned to the same spot. The street looked different under the clear sky, less menacing, more ordinary. The dumpsters were in the same place, but there was no sign of the girl. Victor waited for 3 hours, watching every movement, every shadow. Nothing. The next day, he came back again, and the next, and the next. For a week straight, he established a new routine. He worked in the morning, handled essential matters until mid-afternoon, then spent hours in that street, waiting for a ghost. His obsession began affecting his life. Important meetings had only half his attention. His personal assistant noticed the growing dark circles under his eyes, but knew better than to ask questions. Executives whispered about his erratic behavior. Victor didn't care. On the 8th night, just as his frustration was pushing him to consider hiring a search team, he spotted her. She was 3 blocks away, rooting through a different trash can. His heart pounded. He approached cautiously, afraid she might run again. The girl noticed him before he could speak. Her body went tense, poised to flee. "Wait," Victor said, stopping a safe distance away. "I just want to talk." She eyed him warily. "Why do you keep coming back?" "I need to understand what you meant." A tense silence settled between them. The girl seemed to be weighing her options, deciding whether speaking to him was worth the risk of not escaping immediately. "Isabel," she finally said. "My name is Isabel." The name evoked that same strange feeling in Victor, like he should recognize it, like it mattered. He tried stepping forward, but she retreated instantly. "I don't know who you are," he admitted. "But something about you feels familiar." Isabel let out a short, humorless laugh. "How convenient. You forgot everything, right?" Before Victor could respond, she was off again, running down the street. He tried following her, but she vanished in seconds. Isabel knew those alleys like the back of her hand. In the days that followed, these near encounters repeated themselves. Never in the same place, never at the same time, as if she was testing his persistence. Victor varied his routes daily, expanding his search perimeter. Sometimes he spent hours without seeing her. Other times he glimpsed her from afar only to lose her again. When he did manage to catch up, their conversations were brief and tense. Isabel always kept her distance, ready to run at the slightest hint of danger. "Why do you care now?" she asked in one meeting, rummaging through a trash can. "I need to know who you are," Victor answered. "Why you said I abandoned you?" Isabel just stared, her dark eyes brimming with a long-standing hurt. On another encounter, 2 days later, she mentioned something that stopped Victor cold. "I grew up in an orphanage," she said casually, while stashing a piece of bread in her bag. "Sunshine House, you should remember it." The name sent a chill down Victor's spine. Images tried to form in his mind, but slipped away before he could seize them, like memories of a dream dissolving upon waking. "Sunshine House," he repeated, the name feeling odd on his tongue. Isabel studied him curiously. "You really don't remember?" Before he could answer, she was gone again, vanishing between buildings. After 2 weeks of this frustrating dance, Victor made a decision. At his Nexus Tech office, he met with a middle-aged man in a simple suit carrying a worn leather briefcase. "Maxwell Pierce," the man introduced himself, handing over a plain business card. "Private investigations." Victor wasted no time. "I need information about a street girl named Isabel, around 10 years old, and about an orphanage called Sunshine House." Pierce nodded, showing no surprise. 2 decades serving the ultra-rich had made him immune to unusual requests. "I also want information on my own adoption," Victor continued, feeling strange for saying it out loud. He rarely mentioned his past, even to his adoptive parents. "I need to see if there's any connection." The investigator jotted down quick notes. "How long do I have?" 3 days, Victor replied, sliding a check across the desk. The amount would make most people gasp, but Pierce simply folded it and tucked it into his inside pocket. "I'll be back on Friday." While waiting for the investigation results, Victor continued his encounters with Isabel. Each time he saw her, he noticed more eerily familiar details: the shape of her eyes, the way she furrowed her brow when focused, the slight tilt of her head when she listened. In their final meeting before the investigator's deadline, Victor managed to keep Isabel talking longer than usual. "Why do you live on the streets?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral, afraid to scare her off by sounding too concerned. Isabel shrugged, a gesture too grown up for her small body. "I've got nowhere else." "What about the orphanage?" "I ran away," she cut him off. "I'm never going back there." A heavy silence settled between them. Victor wanted to ask more, but was afraid of pushing too hard and losing her again. "Sunshine House," he said at last. "Did I live there?" Isabel looked at him for a long moment, as though making an important decision. "Room 13, she finally replied. "You promised you'd come back?" And just like always, she disappeared into the night. Victor's nights became torment. Shattered memories invaded his dreams, long halls with peeling paint, the smell of disinfectant mixed with institutional food, a narrow bed with rough sheets, and always, a small hand clutching his, a child's voice begging, "Don't go." He woke up in a cold sweat, more certain each time that he'd forgotten something vital, something he'd buried so deeply that it took the shock of encountering Isabel to begin surfacing. On Friday, Pierce arrived at Victor's office promptly. He carried a thin folder, which worried Victor at first. He'd expected piles of documents, not a small file. "I found some preliminary information," the investigator explained, placing the folder on the desk. "I'm still verifying some key details." Victor opened the folder with slightly trembling fingers. On the first page was an old photo of Sunshine House, a drab 3-story building with a faded sign. The sight triggered such a strong wave of recognition that he nearly lost his breath. "That place," Victor murmured, touching the photo. "I've been there." Pierce nodded. "I visited the orphanage yesterday. The records confirm you spent 4 years there, from age 8 to 12. "What about Isabel?" Victor asked, flipping the page. "I'm pursuing some leads," the investigator said carefully. "There are some intriguing connections, but I want to confirm them before drawing conclusions." Victor frowned, dissatisfied with the vague answer, but Pierce went on. "I found this in the archives," he said, showing an old photo. "I believe that's you." The image showed a thin boy of about 10 sitting on a narrow bed. The small, simple room had institutional green walls. On the door, partially visible, was the number 13. Victor felt a chill. Room 13. exactly what Isabel had mentioned. "Is there anything else in these files about other children related to me?" he asked, voice revealing his anxiety. Pierce shut the folder. "As I said, I need to check some more things." "Check. I'll return Monday with the full report." When the investigator left, Victor remained motionless, staring at the photo. Memories now rushed in with greater clarity, fragments of a life he'd forgotten, or maybe chosen to forget. He remembered room 13, the thin mattress, the creaking bed, the window overlooking a bleak courtyard. The loneliness, the fear, the overwhelming sense of abandonment after losing his parents. But there was more, something that still lingered in the shadows of his mind, refusing to fully take shape. That night, Victor dreamed of endless corridors, numbered doors, children's voices. In his dream, he roamed the orphanage, searching for something or someone. A baby's cries grew louder, drawing him on. He opened door after door, following the sound. Finally, he found a crib. Leaning over to see the crying child, he reached out, about to touch them. Victor woke up with a jolt, heart pounding. The clock read 3:17 a.m. The dream had been so vivid. He knew he wouldn't get back to sleep. He got up and walked to the window of his penthouse. The city lights lay below like a pattern of stars. Somewhere out there, among those streets, was Isabel, a girl who knew him, who claimed he had abandoned her, a girl whose eyes were strangely familiar, whose face stirred memories he still couldn't fully grasp. What had Pierce found? What was the connection the investigator hinted at but hadn't disclosed? Victor pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Monday felt painfully distant. The answers he needed were only a few days away, but the wait was unbearable. Somewhere in his mind, a child's voice still echoed, "You promised you'd come back." Who had made that promise? And to whom? The answer was close. Victor could feel it like a storm forming on the horizon, a truth that would change everything. Monday arrived with agonizing slowness. Victor had barely slept over the past 3 days, tormented by the disjointed memories surfacing in his dreams, only to slip away by morning. When Pierce finally stepped into his office, Victor was on his 5th cup of coffee. "I've uncovered everything," the investigator said bluntly, placing a thicker folder on the desk. "And it's more complicated than we anticipated." Victor opened the folder with unsteady hands. On the first page was a birth certificate. Isabel Marie Lancaster, born May 17th, 10 years ago. Parents, Thomas and Elizabeth Lancaster, the same names on his own birth certificate. "My sister," he muttered, the word sounding strange on his lips. Pierce nodded. "Your biological sister. You both became orphans when you were 8 and she was only 6 months old. You ended up at Sunshine House together." Victor turned the page. There was an old faded photo, a skinny boy about 10 holding a baby. His small, solemn face looked straight at the camera with eyes that had already seen too much pain. "I took care of her," Victor said, the memory now coming back clearly. "At the orphanage. The caregivers let me look after her when I was done with my classes." More images burst into his mind, nights spent rocking a tiny Isabel to sleep, guiding her first wobbly steps down the orphanage's cold corridors, promising he would always protect her. Promises made by one child to another. Pierce turned another page. Here's what happened. The next document was an adoption record. Victor Lancaster, age 12, adopted by Richard and Catherine Murray. Official date, September 3rd, 13 years ago. The Murrays only wanted one child, Pierce explained, his professional tone concealing any personal opinion. Specifically, an older, exceptionally bright boy. You fit their profile. "And Isabel?" Victor asked, though he already knew the answer. "She stayed behind. She was only 2 at the time." The pain Victor felt was physical, like a punch to the gut. He remembered now, his desperation when he was separated from her, the frantic promises that he'd come back for her, the tears of a tiny child who didn't understand why her brother was leaving. "I promised I'd come back," Victor said, voice cracking. "Promised I wouldn't leave her there forever." "You were 12, Pierce pointed out. "Her child, with no legal power in the matter." Victor shook his head. Logic did nothing to ease the crushing guilt that overwhelmed him. He kept turning pages, absorbing every painful detail. The next revelation hit like another blow. The Murrays knew about Isabel, Pierce said, tapping a signed statement. They were explicitly informed you had a younger sister still at the orphanage. And they never told me, Victor said, anger beginning to replace the initial shock. More documents, letters from the orphanage to the Murrays in the first few years after Victor's adoption, mentioning Isabel, asking if the family wanted to maintain contact between siblings, all apparently ignored. They made me forget her, Victor muttered, the puzzle pieces falling into place. They never talked about my past. Anytime I asked about the orphanage, they changed the subject. When I had nightmares and called out a name, they told me it was just a bad dream. The deliberate erasure of his childhood memories was now obvious. A wealthy family wanting a child without baggage, with no ties to a less privileged past, with no sister in need of help. What happened to Isabel after that? He asked, dreading the answer. Pierce turned to another page. When she was 5, she was adopted by a couple named Reyes, Manuel and Gloria. He was a truck driver. She worked as a housekeeper. Good people, but with limited resources. Victor saw pictures of Isabel with the Reyes, genuine smiles, tight hugs. For a brief period, it seemed she'd found a home. The economy collapsed last year, Pierce went on. Manuel lost his job. They lost their house, ended up in a temporary shelter where conditions were terrible. Isabel ran away 6 months ago. Victor closed his eyes, letting the devastating story sink in. His sister, his responsibility, based on the promises he'd made as a child, had lived on the streets while he amassed billions. The irony was unbearable. "Where are the Reyes now?" he asked. "Still in the shelter, looking for Isabel. They do care for her despite their hardships." Victor nodded slowly. He looked up and closed the folder. The last pieces of his mental puzzle had fallen into place. The repressed memories, the strange void he'd felt even when surrounded by wealth, the familiar face of a girl sifting through garbage. "What do you plan to do now?" Pierce asked. Victor stood, a new determination forming amidst the storm of emotions. "I'm going to find her. Today. Right now," he said, resolute. "Then I'll fix whatever I can." The implications of what he'd discovered were still unfolding in his mind. The conversation he'd have to have with his adoptive parents, the future he had to rebuild, the emotional scars that both he and Isabel carried. But one thing was crystal clear. He wouldn't rest until he found his sister, until he fulfilled, 13 years late, the promise a boy had made to the little child who trusted him completely. "Find her," he told Pierce, already walking toward the door. "Use every resource necessary. And locate the best child psychologists in the city. We'll need plenty of help." The truth had come out, raw and painful. Now it was time to rebuild what had been broken so long ago. The Murrays' mansion was in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, an imposing property with perfectly manicured gardens and a prime ocean view. Victor hadn't visited his adoptive parents in months, always citing unavoidable business obligations. The truth was that, even before learning about Isabel, something in that house had always made him feel like an outsider. He parked in the circular driveway and sat there a few minutes, steeling himself for the conversation he was about to have. The folder containing Pierce's documents felt like a lead weight in his hands. Catherine Murray opened the door with a smile that quickly faded when she saw Victor's expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked, genuine concern in her eyes. "We need to talk," Victor replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You and Dad." Now, Richard Murray was in his study as usual. A tall man with graying hair and perfect posture, he had built a real estate empire from the ground up. Victor had once admired him for that, until now. "Victor!" "What a pleasant surprise," said Richard, standing to greet him. He, too, noticed the seriousness on Victor's face. "What's wrong?" Victor placed the folder on the desk. "Isabel Lancaster," he said simply. "My sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine put her hand over her mouth, while Richard visibly paled. Guilt on both their faces was all the confirmation Victor needed. "You knew," he continued, voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "You always knew. And you made me forget her." Catherine was the first to speak. "Victor, we can explain." "Explain what?" he interrupted, opening the folder and spreading the documents on the desk. "That you lied to me for 13 years, that you deliberately separated me from my only blood relative, that you manipulated my memories so I'd forget my own sister." Richard sank into his chair. "It wasn't that simple." "Then explain," Victor demanded. "Because I found my 10-year-old sister digging through garbage for food while I live in a $50 million penthouse." Catherine began to weep silently, but Victor was unmoved. He wanted answers. Richard began hesitantly. "When we decided to adopt, we only wanted one child, a boy. We saw your file, learned about your exceptional intelligence, and we knew we wanted you. And my sister was just an inconvenience," Victor said bitterly. "It wasn't like that," Catherine protested, "but the process for adopting 2 children would have been far more complicated, would have taken much longer. So you just left her there for convenience," Victor concluded. Richard took a deep breath. "At first, we considered keeping in touch, maybe even adopting her later. But you had so many adjustment problems, nightmares, anxiety attacks. You called out for her in your sleep. The doctors suggested a clean break," Catherine added. "They said ongoing contact would only prolong the trauma of separation, and that you'd eventually forget and move on. And you accepted that conveniently neat advice without a second thought," said Victor, disappointment evident in his voice. "We were afraid of losing you," Richard admitted. "You were so fragile, so traumatized. When you finally started to stabilize, to forget the past, it seemed safer to leave things as they were." Victor shook his head in disbelief. "What about the orphanage's letters? They contacted you multiple times." Catherine and Richard exchanged guilty looks. After a moment's hesitation, Catherine walked over to the bookshelf. She removed a few books, revealing a wooden box hidden behind them. "We saved everything," she said, placing the box on the desk. "We always thought we'd tell you when you were older, when you were more stable. But the time never seemed right." Victor opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of letters from the orphanage, reports on Isabel, photos of her as she grew up, an entire childhood documented and kept secret from him. He picked up one photo, Isabel at 5, on her first day of school. A shy smile, big eyes just like his, the same picture Pierce had found in the adoption records for the Reyes family. "You had all this," Victor said, his voice shaking. "All these memories that should have been mine, too." "We did what we thought was best for you," Richard insisted. "Look at everything you've accomplished, the life you've built." "A life built on a lie," Victor cut in. "A life where I had everything except the one thing that really mattered, my real family." "We are your family," Catherine said, tears rolling down her flawlessly made-up face. "We love you, Victor." Victor closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was a coldness Catherine and Richard had never seen before. "Love shouldn't include this level of deceit," he said, carefully gathering the photos and letters back into the box. "You didn't just lie to me. You stole my chance to protect my sister, to keep the promise I made her." "Victor, please," Catherine pleaded. "No," he said, standing up with the box and the folder. "I can't forgive you right now. Maybe never." Richard also rose. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find my sister," Victor replied. "Bring her back and fix what I can." "What about us?" Catherine asked, voice trembling. Victor paused at the door, giving one final glance to the people he had called his parents for so many years. "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if there's a way back after this." He left without looking back, burdened by rediscovered memories and clutching the treasure of stolen recollections. In the car, he opened the box again and looked at some of the letters. One mentioned the Reyes family, their address, contact details from that time. He picked up his phone and dialed Pierce. "I've found more about the Reyes," he said as soon as the investigator answered. "Locate them as quickly as possible. I want to know everything, how they treated Isabel, why they lost custody." Driving back into the city, Victor made a silent promise. He wouldn't just find Isabel, he'd do whatever it took to restore the bond that had been so brutally severed. A new determination took shape, fueled by the pain of betrayal. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still in his hands. It wasn't hard to find Isabel again. After the gut-wrenching talk with his adoptive parents, Victor devoted himself entirely to locating his sister. Using Nexus Tech's resources, he mapped the areas of the city where homeless children often stayed and established a pattern of the places Isabel frequented. She was methodical in her movements, a survival skill she'd clearly honed over time. The morning after discovering the truth, Victor cancelled all his meetings indefinitely, delegating tasks to his vice president. For the first time in years, something was more important than the company. He found her on the third day of searching, rummaging in dumpsters behind a restaurant on the city's east side. His heart pounded when he saw her, not a stranger anymore, but his sister, his blood. A missing piece of him that he was determined to reclaim. Victor approached her cautiously, carrying a bag. Isabel spotted him right away, her body going tense like a cornered animal, ready to bolt. "I'm not leaving this time," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I brought some things for you." Isabel watched him through narrowed eyes but didn't run. Victor took that as a small victory. "What do you want from me?" she asked bluntly, her tone defensive. "Just to talk," he replied, setting the bag on the ground between them. "Whenever you're ready." He stepped back, giving her space. Isabel waited a moment, then darted forward, grabbing the bag and inspecting its contents. Inside were a fresh sandwich, a bottle of water, a chocolate bar, and a light jacket. "I don't need your charity," she muttered, but she didn't give the items back. "It's not charity," Victor said gently. "It's the least I can do." She bit her lip, studying him as if trying to decipher some hidden motive. After a hesitant moment, she turned her back and walked away, clutching the bag tightly. It wasn't exactly gratitude, but it was a start. Victor didn't try to follow. The next day, he returned with another bag, more food, clean socks, a small hygiene kit. This time, Isabel was waiting for him, perched on a wooden crate. "You found out, didn't you?" she asked as he approached. "Who I am?" Victor nodded. "I did. Now you're going to send me somewhere, aren't you? Hand me over to social services." "I won't do anything you don't want," Victor promised, extending the new bag. "I just want to help." Isabel took it, though her gaze remained distrustful. "Why should I believe you? You abandoned me once." Those words hit Victor like a punch. "I never wanted to leave you," he said, his voice choked with pent-up emotion. "I was a kid, too. I had no choice." For an instant, he saw something flicker in her eyes, a split second of doubt in her certainty that he had betrayed her. But the moment passed quickly. "Whatever," she muttered, standing up. "Thanks for the food." Over the next few days, Victor established a pattern. He found Isabel in various places, always bringing something useful, never too much, never fancy enough to feel like a bribe. Gradually, their interactions stretched from fleeting moments to cautious conversations. Through his visits, Victor caught a glimpse of the harsh reality of street life. He learned Isabel slept in an abandoned storage room, where an elderly guard let her stay in exchange for small chores, like tidying up or fetching him coffee. He learned she avoided certain alleys ruled by older, more aggressive homeless teens. He learned she never really slept well, always on high alert for danger. "How do you manage out here?" he asked one afternoon as they shared a sandwich on a park bench. The first time Isabel agreed to sit with him, she shrugged. "You learn where it's safe, where to get food, who helps and who hurts." "What about school?" Isabel laughed without mirth. "What school?" "I haven't been to school since I ran away from the last shelter." The weight of that hit Victor like a ton of bricks. His sister, clearly bright, he could tell, missing out on education, safety, a normal childhood. Meanwhile, he was stockpiling fortunes. On the second week of his visits, Victor arrived to find Isabel with a fresh bruise on her face. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed. "Nothing," she said quickly, turning her face away. "Isabel, please," he insisted. "I want to help." After a moment of resistance, she relented. "Some older kids tried to steal my stuff. I fought them off." There was a hint of pride in her voice, despite the bruise. That day, Victor brought not just food, but also a small pepper spray. "For emergencies only," he said. "And a prepaid phone. My number's already in it." If you ever need anything, anytime. To his surprise, Isabel accepted both. It was only on the 10th day that something truly changed. Victor was telling a harmless story about an explosion he'd accidentally caused in his first school science lab, where he'd singed his teacher's eyebrows. Then it happened. Isabel smiled. A genuine smile that lit up her entire face, revealing, for a brief moment, the child hidden beneath layers of distrust and survival instincts. Victor felt as if he'd just been handed the most precious gift in the world. In the days that followed, Isabel's defenses began to drop, slowly but surely. On their 15th meeting, in a small cafe Victor finally convinced her to enter, she shared her first real piece of personal history. "I was adopted when I was 5, she said suddenly, while stirring her hot chocolate. "By a family named Reyes." Victor just nodded, wary of speaking too much and shutting her down. "Manuel and Gloria," Isabel went on, her eyes on the window, not on him. "He was a truck driver. She worked cleaning houses. They didn't have much, but..." Her voice softened. "They were good people. Really good." "What was it like living with them?" Victor asked gently. A small smile crossed Isabel's lips. "Gloria would make tortillas on Sunday mornings, best tortillas in the world, and Manuel used to let me ride with him on short truck runs. He'd let me pretend I was driving whenever we stopped to rest." As she spoke, Isabel's guarded posture eased. For the first time, Victor glimpsed a normal child beneath the streetwise survivor. "They put me in school. Gloria helped me with homework every night, even when she was exhausted from work. Manuel hung a swing from a tree in our yard." Then the happy memory gave way to harsher truths. Then the economy tanked. Gas prices soared. Manuel's company shut down. Gloria had to clean more houses, working all the time, but it wasn't enough. Victor listened, his heart constricting at every word. "We lost the house after 6 months of missing rent, moved to a motel room, then a smaller one, then a shelter." Her voice became flat, as though draining the emotion on purpose. "They tried, you know. Really tried." "I'm sure they did," Victor said gently. "The shelter was awful. Families packed together, no privacy, constant fights, drugs." Isabel swallowed hard. "Gloria cried every night, thinking I didn't notice. Manuel spent more time away, looking for work, any work." Victor waited patiently as she gathered the courage to continue. "One day when I was 7, they took me to meet with a social worker. Told me it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet." Her voice faltered. "They promised they'd come back for me. And they never did," Victor finished softly. Isabel shook her head. "I think they wanted to, but they couldn't. So you've been in the system since then. Lots of foster homes, some okay, some not. I ran away from a few, got returned by others." She shrugged. "The last one had too many kids and not enough food. The dad drank a lot. The mom screamed non-stop, so I left." "At just 10, Victor asked, horrified and impressed at once. "At least on the streets. I only worry about myself," she said proudly. "I've been getting by for 6 months." Victor closed his eyes briefly, absorbing her story. His sister, his responsibility, had gone through all that while he lived in luxury, completely unaware. The guilt was almost paralyzing. "It's not your fault," Isabel said, surprising him with her insight. "So you were just a kid too." "But I should have remembered," Victor insisted. "I should have looked for you." "How? If you didn't even know I existed? Your parents never told you, right?" Victor shook his head. "They hid everything. Even the photos the orphanage sent." A heavy silence hung between them, both coming to terms with how adult decisions had shaped their lives, separating them in ways that felt permanent. "Isabel," Victor said at last, mustering his courage, "I want you to know I'll never abandon you again, ever. No matter what." She studied him, the ingrained distrust warring with her desperate need to believe. "I'm not asking you to move in with me tomorrow," he continued, "or trust me completely right away. I'm just asking for a chance to prove I mean it." "How?" "Any way you'll let me," Victor replied. "We can start small. Maybe a safer place to stay. Maybe going back to school if you want, or just keep meeting like this until you're ready for more." His proposal hung in the air like a delicate bubble. Victor knew that pushing too hard could burst it, destroying the fragile trust they were building. "Why do you want to help now?" Isabel asked, that last layer of defense in her voice. "Because we're family," he answered simply, "and because I made a promise a long time ago." "What promise?" "That I'd always take care of you. That I'd never let anything bad happen to you," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. "A promise I couldn't keep before, but it's never too late to make good on it." Something broke in Isabel's carefully guarded expression, a tiny crack in the armor she'd built. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need," Victor assured her. "I'll be here always." When they parted that day, something had shifted between them. The bridge Victor had been trying to build finally touched ground on her side. The path ahead was still long, the trust still fragile, but they'd taken the first and hardest step. That night, returning to his luxurious but lonely penthouse, Victor began to plan. A safe apartment Isabel could use when she was ready, tutors to help her catch up on lost schooling, child therapists who specialized in trauma, a legal framework to ensure she'd never be left helpless again. But above all, he planned to be present, to be the brother she deserved and had been denied, to rebuild, brick by brick, the family they'd both lost. The bridge was being constructed slowly, with foundations that wouldn't be easily shaken this time. Victor spent 3 full days reorganizing his penthouse. The guest room nearest his own was completely transformed, sterile white walls replaced by a soothing shade of blue, and minimalist decor swapped for something more welcoming. He wasn't sure what a 10-year-old girl might like, so he stuck to the basics, leaving space for Isabel to make it her own. "I don't think we should overfill the room," he explained to the decorator he'd hired. "She needs to feel she can shape the space herself." On the eve of Isabel's arrival, Victor roamed the apartment, double-checking everything. The fridge was stocked with healthy foods and some treats he guessed she might like. A shelf filled with books of various reading levels, since he wasn't sure how far behind her schooling was. A desk, a computer, new clothes in the closet, but not an overwhelming amount. When the intercom buzzed to announce her arrival, his heart pounded in a way it never had, not even before negotiations worth billions. Isabel stepped in cautiously, carrying only a worn backpack and a faded blue stuffed bunny, the same one Victor had given her at the orphanage, a detail he now remembered vividly. Her eyes swept over the luxurious apartment with a mix of awe and apprehension. "This is just temporary, remember?" she said, as though reminding herself. "Until we figure out the next step." "As long as you want," Victor agreed. "No pressure." That was their arrangement. After weeks of patient conversation, Isabel finally agreed to leave the streets, but under explicit conditions. It was a test, a temporary arrangement, and she could walk away any time if she felt uncomfortable. "Here's your room," Victor said, opening the door. "We can change anything you don't like." Isabel walked in hesitantly, inspecting every corner as if searching for hidden traps. She set her backpack on the floor and perched on the edge of the bed, testing the mattress with skepticism. "It's big," she remarked. The first day felt awkwardly formal. Isabel measured every word, every move, as if she were in hostile territory. She refused to touch anything without explicit permission, picked at her dinner, and remained hyper-alert, like a small, wild animal. That night, Victor heard her softly crying in her room. He stood by the door, heartbroken, torn between wanting to comfort her and knowing she needed space. He remembered the child psychologist's advice: respect her boundaries, trust will come gradually. On the second day, Victor called his assistant and cancelled all his meetings for the week. "Family emergency," he explained, words he'd never used before. Isabel spent the morning exploring the apartment carefully, as if mapping escape routes. She refused the new clothes he offered, preferring her own threadbare but familiar items. "Don't you have to work?" she asked at lunch, more a statement than a question. "The company can manage without me for a few days," he replied. She studied him with a disconcerting intensity. "You really are rich, huh?" "I have more money than I need," he admitted. "And I was living off trash," she remarked, without accusation, just a stark acknowledgement of the absurd disparity in their lives. On the third day, there was a small breakthrough. Isabel accepted a new t-shirt, leaving one of her old ones for laundry. A tiny concession that meant everything. On the fourth day, she asked if she could help make dinner. Together, they cooked a simple meal, pasta with tomato sauce, nothing fancy. It was the first time Isabel smiled inside the apartment. "Gloria taught me to cook," she mentioned, while stirring the sauce. She said everyone should know at least 3 dishes well. Over a week went by. Victor juggled remote work and spending time with Isabel. He quickly realized she valued his consistent presence more than any expensive gifts. Gradually, the edges softened. Isabel began leaving personal items around. A book in the living room, her favorite cup in the kitchen, small signals she was starting to feel more comfortable. Nights remained the hardest. She had frequent nightmares, some worse than others. Victor learned that simply sitting beside her, without touching unless she asked, was the best comfort. Sometimes he'd read out loud until she fell asleep again. "You used to do that at the orphanage," Isabel remarked one night after he'd calmed her down. "Read stories to me until I slept." On the 10th day, over breakfast, Isabel surprised him. "Can I see where you work sometime?" "Of course," Victor answered, both touched and surprised by her interest. At Nexus Tech, Victor introduced Isabel as his sister, the first time he'd used those words in public. The staff, already puzzled by the sudden changes in their CEO's routine, watched curiously as the petite girl with a guarded gaze and defiant chin strolled through. "You built all this?" she asked, despite her best efforts not to seem impressed. "With a lot of help," he replied. Back at the apartment, the dynamic between them felt different. Isabel brought Victor a glass of water while he was working at his laptop, a small gesture that, for most kids, would be trivial, but for her was a conscious decision to care about someone instead of just surviving. "Thanks," he said, smiling as he took the glass. Later that night, as they watched a movie together, another first, Isabel broke another barrier. "I'm thinking about staying," she said, her gaze on the screen. "For now." Victor felt a surge of emotion. "I'd be glad if you did." Isabel nodded, as if coming to a major decision. "I'll need some rules, though." "Like what?" "No lies," she said firmly. "About anything." "I promise," Victor replied with equal seriousness. "And I need space sometimes. When I say I want to be alone, it doesn't mean I'm mad. I just need to process things." "Understood." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And I want to go back to school. Eventually." It was the first sign Isabel was thinking about the future, not just day-to-day survival. Victor felt hope blossom in his chest, not an instant solution to years of trauma, but the first genuine step toward healing. That night, before they each retreated to their rooms, Isabel paused in the doorway of hers and said something Victor would never forget. "Thanks for coming back for me, even if it took a while." Choosing a school for Isabel was the first big hurdle. Victor initially thought of placing her in Westlake Academy, the elite institution he had attended after being adopted. He hired private tutors to assess her level and prepare her for returning to class. "I'm 3 years behind," Isabel said gloomily after the first evaluation. "That doesn't matter," Victor assured her. "You're smart. You'll catch up." After 2 weeks of intensive tutoring, it was clear that despite her time on the streets, Isabel had a sharp mind and an eagerness to learn that instability hadn't extinguished. Her determination amazed the tutors and Victor. But when they finally visited Westlake Academy, Isabel became visibly uncomfortable in the pristine corridors among neatly uniformed students. "I don't like it here," she admitted on the drive back. "Everybody looks the same." To Victor's surprise, she asked to check out a public school near the apartment. "I want a normal place," she explained. "I don't need a fancy school." That was the first major lesson for Victor about the kind of life Isabel really wanted, not a mirror image of his own path, but something authentic for her. The first day of school was nerve-wracking for both of them. Victor arranged for a driver, but Isabel insisted she could go alone. "I've been surviving on the streets," she argued. "I can handle a school bus." "At least let me take you on your first day," Victor bargained. At the school gates, she hesitated for a split second. For that moment, Victor saw the vulnerability behind her tough facade, a 10-year-old girl facing yet another unknown environment. "I'll be here when you get out," he promised. Isabel nodded and walked in, her new backpack contrasting with her cautious steps. When Victor picked her up hours later, he immediately knew something had gone wrong. Isabel got into the car silently, her face closed off. "How was it?" he asked gently. "Fine," she replied curtly. Only that evening, over dinner, did the truth emerge. "They made fun of how I talk," she finally confessed, "said I sound like a beggar." Victor felt a flare of anger but kept calm. Kids can be cruel, but not all of them. "I don't want to go back," Isabel declared. "What do you want to do then?" The question caught her off guard. She obviously expected him to insist, not ask her opinion. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I don't want their pity." "What if you give it another chance?" Victor suggested. "Not for them, for yourself." Isabel reluctantly agreed. The following days were tough, but small signs of progress appeared. A science teacher noticed her interest in astronomy. A classmate offered to share a snack. Tiny triumphs that Victor quietly celebrated. While Isabel fought to adapt to school, Victor waged battles of his own in court. Securing legal guardianship turned into a bureaucratic maze. His wealth and influence expedited some steps, but couldn't bypass all complexities. "The Reyes still have legal rights as adoptive parents," his lawyer explained. "We need their relinquishment, or proof of abandonment." "They didn't abandon her," Victor argued, recalling Isabel's story. "They were desperate and ran out of options." Contacting the Reyes turned out to be another delicate moment. When Victor finally met them face to face, he saw genuine love in their eyes for Isabel, despite the circumstances that had separated them. Gloria wept upon hearing that the girl was safe. "We never wanted to let her go," Manuel explained, voice trembling. "We thought it was just temporary, until we got back on our feet." Victor made an offer that surprised everyone. The Reyes would relinquish legal guardianship to him, but they could remain in regular contact with Isabel. Moreover, he'd provide financial help so they could regain some stability, not as a payoff, but as acknowledgement of the care they'd given his sister when he couldn't. At home, the adjustment wasn't always smooth. One Saturday morning, Victor found Isabel stashing food in her room, a habit she'd developed on the streets, where the next meal was never guaranteed. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. "You'll never lack food here." "Force of habit," she admitted, embarrassed. The nightmares happened often, some nights worse than others. Victor discovered that simply sitting by her, not touching unless invited, was the best comfort. Sometimes he read to her until she drifted back to sleep. "You used to do that in the orphanage," Isabel said one of those nights. "Read stories until I fell asleep." That shared memory hung between them like a delicate bridge connecting past and present. Gradually, they created their own routines. Sunday morning pancakes, inspired by Gloria's tortilla tradition. Friday movie nights, making up for Victor's lost years devoted solely to work. Little rituals that turned a luxurious apartment into something closer to a home. Victor also sought professional help, not just for Isabel but for himself. Dr. Martinez, a child trauma specialist, became a regular presence in their lives. "You both experienced significant losses," she explained in one session. "Reuniting doesn't erase the past. It only creates space for a new future." The most significant moment came 2 months in. Victor was working late in his study when Isabel walked in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Thought you could use a break," she said, setting one beside him. "Thank you," Victor said, touched by the simple but profound gesture. "You know," Isabel began, sitting in the chair opposite his, "I've been thinking, maybe we should visit the orphanage sometime, together, to understand better what happened." The suggestion, coming from her, meant more than all the legal steps and logistical adjustments combined. It was a sign that Isabel wasn't just adapting to her new life, she was beginning to integrate her past into her present. "Whenever you're ready," Victor answered. That night, sharing hot chocolate and talking about memories both painful and precious, the Lancaster siblings took another step on their long journey to rebuild what had been broken so long ago. The address was in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Victor parked his car, choosing a discreet model rather than a company limo, and stared at the small housing complex where the Reyes had managed a new start. Simple, yet decent apartments intended for families in financial recovery. Pierce had made the initial contact. After discovering where the Reyes lived, Victor kept his distance, unsure of how to proceed. His decision to finally face them came after yet another night when Isabel woke up crying in her sleep, calling out for Gloria. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Pierce had asked when Victor decided, "Yes, I need to see for myself what kind of people they are." Now, standing before apartment 304, Victor took a deep breath and knocked softly, hearing movement inside. The woman who opened the door looked about 40, dark hair flecked with grey, eyes tired but kind. Gloria Reyes appeared older than in the pictures Pierce had shown, stress from the past few years etched into every line on her face. "Yes," she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Reyes, I'm Victor Lancaster." The woman's expression changed immediately, recognition, fear, and hope flickering across her eyes. "It's about Isabel," he added. Gloria put her hand to her mouth. She's okay," Victor said quickly. "She's safe." Gloria called for her husband and led Victor inside. The small apartment was tidy, decorated with family photos. Victor noticed several of Isabel, smiling, clearly cherished. Manuel Reyes entered from the kitchen. He was of average height, with calloused hands from hard labor and the same tired look as his wife. He greeted Victor with calm dignity that rose above their circumstances. "You found our girl," he stated rather than asked. Victor nodded, taking the simple couch seat they offered. "Actually, she found me." The initial conversation was cautious. Victor briefly explained how he'd met Isabel and how he'd discovered they were siblings. The Reyes listened carefully, exchanging loaded glances. "Why are you here?" Gloria finally asked, her tone firm despite the emotion evident. "Did you come to judge her?" "I came to understand," Victor answered honestly. Manuel straightened as if ready to present a long-rehearsed defense. "We loved Isabel like our own daughter. We never wanted to give her up, but after we lost everything—" "The system said it would be temporary," Gloria explained, tears streaming freely now. "Just until we found steady work, a place to live. But then they kept adding more conditions, more paperwork, more waiting." Victor listened as the couple described their descent into desperation, job loss, losing their home, bouncing from one overcrowded shelter to another. Giving Isabel to the system had been an act of last resort, with empty promises that they could soon reunite. "When we finally got this apartment, when Manuel got a job at the factory, we thought we could bring her home," Gloria said. "But by then, we found out she'd run away." Their voices brimmed with genuine pain. Victor realized there had been no intentional abandonment, only desperate people, cornered by a system that provided no real solutions. "Does she talk about us?" Gloria asked tentatively. "Does she hate us?" "She speaks of you with warmth," Victor assured them gently, "of Sunday tortillas, the truck rides, the swing in the yard." Gloria covered her face, crying quietly. Manuel put an arm around her, his own face a portrait of suppressed emotion. "She's attending school now," Victor continued. "She's adjusting well, all things considered. She's an incredible girl." "She always was," Manuel said, pride shining through his sorrow. "So smart, so strong." Gloria mustered the courage to ask what Victor had been expecting. "Can we see her?" Victor hesitated. He'd thought long and hard about this. He remembered how fragile Isabel's progress was, the nightmares slowly fading, the trust that took months to build. "I don't think it's the right time," he replied at last. "She's gone through a lot of trauma. She's only just stabilizing." "I understand," Manuel said, though disappointment was evident in his eyes. "Whatever's best for her." "I can offer something else," Victor said. "I can keep you informed, photos, her school progress. Maybe us, when she's stronger emotionally, and when she herself expresses the desire." "You're doing the right thing," Gloria interrupted, wiping her tears. "Protecting her. That's all we ever wanted to do, too." Before leaving, Victor placed an envelope on the table. "This isn't payment or charity," he explained, anticipating Manuel's proud expression. It's gratitude for taking care of her when I couldn't, for loving my sister. Driving home afterward, Victor felt a whirl of emotions: compassion for the Reyes, gratitude for the love they had given Isabel, and an unyielding determination to shield his sister from further emotional upheaval. Isabel was waiting in the apartment, pretending disinterest but clearly anxious. "Did you find them?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes. How are they?" Victor chose his words with care. "They're doing better now. Manuel's working at a factory. They have a small apartment." Isabel took in the information silently, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. "They asked about me." "Yes," Victor admitted. "They care deeply about you. But not enough to keep me," she murmured, that old wound surfacing. Victor sat next to her. Things aren't always so simple. They faced impossible choices, just like many people do when they're desperate. "Like our parents, our real ones?" Isabel asked, startling him with her connection. "Our parents didn't choose to leave us," he replied softly. "And I believe the Reyes didn't choose it either. Circumstances forced their hand. So nobody's at fault." The question carried the weight of a child trying to make sense of a chaotic world. "Sometimes there are no villains," Victor said. "Just imperfect people doing the best they can with what they have." Isabel contemplated that for a long time. "Are you going to take me to see them?" "Only if you want to, and only when you feel truly ready." "I'm not," she admitted, relief evident in her voice. "Not yet." "There's no rush," Victor assured her. "Let's focus on building something stable here, just you and me. The past will still be there when we're ready to face it." Isabel reached for his hand, a rare gesture of physical contact initiated by her. Victor accepted it, feeling the small hand in his, no longer the 2-year-old's hand he'd left behind, but still desperately in need of protection. "We're a family now," she said, half question, half statement. "We always were," Victor replied. "We just got lost for a while." That night was a turning point. No nightmares, no silent tears. Just 2 siblings watching a movie together, sharing popcorn, finally looking more toward the future than the past. Victor knew more challenges lay ahead. Trauma didn't vanish overnight. Isabel's feelings about the Reyes and her own past would keep evolving. But for the first time, he felt they were truly on the right path. Not just surviving together, but starting to build something new. The past had been confronted, not fully resolved, but at least acknowledged for what it was, a closed chapter in a story still being written. Dr. Martinez's office was cozy, contrasting with the formal spaces Victor usually occupied. Plush chairs, soft wall colors, living plants in the corners, all designed to create a sense of safety. "Remember, there are no right or wrong answers here," the therapist reminded them at the start of their first family session. "This is a space to explore together what you're feeling." Victor nodded, trying to appear comfortable, though he felt totally out of his element. Beside him, Isabel also looked uneasy, her eyes fixed on a random spot on the far wall. The first few sessions were tough. Isabel responded with monosyllables or shrugs. Victor overcompensated by talking too much, proposing plans, solutions, strategies, retreating into a familiar problem-solving mode instead of facing raw emotions. "Victor, Doctor," Martinez gently interrupted in the 3rd session, "how did you feel when you found out you'd abandoned Isabel?" The question hit him like a punch. It wasn't my..." he stammered, then paused and drew a shaky breath. "Devastated," he finally admitted, "and guilty, even though logically I know I was just a child." That was the first crack in the armor they had both built up. The first open admission that behind the practical fixes and outward progress, deep wounds still needed tending. In the 5th session, Isabel surprised everyone. "I'm scared to sleep," she confessed suddenly, cutting off a conversation about school routines. "Because in my dreams, I'm always being left behind by everyone." That admission opened the floodgates. Week after week, Isabel started sharing more of her deepest fears, waking up to find everything gone again. The anxiety that any good thing she clung to would vanish, the distrust that had become her default defense mechanism. Victor, in turn, confronted his own demons: persistent guilt, the void he had filled with work and material success, how he'd suppressed childhood memories to forge a sanitized version of his past that erased the pain of separation. "I think part of me knew," he admitted in a particularly intense session. "There was always this empty space inside me, this sense that something was missing, even when I had everything money could buy." Progress wasn't linear. After weeks of advancement, a careless remark about family on a TV show triggered a severe setback for Isabel. She withdrew, refusing to speak for days, testing the limits of Victor's patience and understanding. "That's normal," Dr. Martinez assured him. "Healing isn't a straight line." Victor learned to respond differently, no more problem-solving or expensive gifts, just consistent presence and giving space when needed. He learned to sense when Isabel needed distance to process, and when she needed closeness to feel safe. A pivotal moment came 3 months into therapy. Isabel had a particularly rough day at school, a family tree assignment that stirred painful questions about belonging. Victor found her in her room, furiously tearing up the project papers. Instead of trying to stop her or offer advice, he sat silently by her side, just being there while she let out her frustration. "Why does it have to be so complicated?" she asked eventually, her voice thick with tears. "Why can't we just be a normal family?" "I'm not sure there's such a thing as a normal family," Victor replied softly. "Everyone has their own complications and stories." Isabel looked at the shredded papers on the floor. "What am I going to tell my teacher?" "We'll figure something out together," Victor offered, "as siblings." The look Isabel gave him then was etched into his memory. Surprise, followed by a gradual softening of her features. "Thanks, brother," she said, the word sounding both strange and perfectly right on her tongue. It was the first time she'd called him that without any prompting or contrived context, a spontaneous acknowledgement of the bond that, despite the separation and trauma, had remained intact at some fundamental level. Therapy sessions continued, but something changed in their dynamic, as though an invisible barrier had finally fallen, allowing a more genuine connection. Victor began setting aside specific time for Isabel in his schedule, not just to help with homework or practical tasks, but simply to be with her. Board games on Wednesday nights, Saturday walks in the park, little rituals that built a sense of permanence. Isabel, in turn, began leaving subtle signs that she was putting down roots. Plants in her room, long-term projects, casual mentions of future events. She was finally starting to believe that her present was stable. "Can we go to the beach this summer?" she asked at dinner 6 months after moving in. "I've never seen the ocean." The simple question held deep meaning, Isabel making plans for the future, confident she'd still be there when summer came. "Sure," Victor said, trying not to let his emotion show. "We could rent a place on the coast for a few weeks." In one of their last sessions before the summer break, Dr. Martinez asked each of them to share a positive memory they'd created together. Isabel mentioned the night they'd built a makeshift camp in the living room after a power outage, talking by flashlight. Victor talked about the school science fair, where Isabel's solar system project had won an honorable mention. "Do you realize what's happening?" the therapist asked with a smile. "You're creating new memories to balance the old ones. You're rewriting your story together." As they left the office, Victor understood that their wounds hadn't vanished. Likely they never would. But they were healing, becoming part of who they were instead of defining them completely. "Ice cream," he suggested, another little ritual they'd developed after therapy. Isabel smiled and spontaneously took his hand, another milestone in her healing process. "Always, brother, always." The Nexus Tech boardroom was as full as ever, eager executives, flawless financial reports, charts showing upward lines of growth and profit. Victor listened to the quarterly presentation with an expression his CFO couldn't quite read. "As you can see, Mr. Lancaster, we're projecting a 32% growth for the next fiscal year, exceeding all market expectations," concluded the executive proudly. A pause followed, everyone expecting Victor's usual response. Sharp questions about margins, efficiencies, strategies to push those impressive numbers even higher. Instead, he asked something completely unexpected. "How many of our employees have school-aged children?" The CFO blinked. "Approximately 42%, I believe." "Why?" "How many have access to daycare or after-school programs?" The room went uncomfortably quiet. I'd need to check, sir. Victor nodded thoughtfully. Do that, and prepare a proposal for an on-site childcare center, plus flexible schedules for parents. I want it on my desk next week. As the executives exchanged puzzled glances, Victor went on. Also, I want a plan on how we can adapt some of our technology to improve tracking and family reunification systems for orphanages and shelters. The meeting concluded amid murmurs of bewilderment. 6 months ago, such directives would have been unthinkable. The Victor Lancaster they knew had been laser-focused on growth, innovation, and market dominance, not on social issues or work-life balance. But the Victor Lancaster they knew hadn't yet found his sister. Later, in his office, Victor reflected on the journey of the past few months. The wall that once displayed only diplomas and corporate awards was now shared with Isabel's drawings. Next to the financial reports on his desk was a calendar noting school activities and therapy appointments. His phone rang. It was Isabel, calling after class. "How'd the math test go?" he asked. "I think I did okay," she said. "The tutoring really helped." "That's great. Let's celebrate with pizza." "Actually," Isabel hesitated, "I was thinking we could swing by that shelter today. I'm helping organize the library." Victor smiled. 2 months ago, Isabel started showing an interest in helping other kids in situations like her own. A few visits to a local shelter had become a weekly commitment. "Sure. I'll pick you up in half an hour." In the car on the way to the shelter, Isabel seemed pensive. "What's on your mind?" Victor asked. "I have an idea," she said slowly, "but it's a big one. The best ideas usually are. What if we create a place to help kids like me, not just with food or shelter, but with finding their families, or finding new ones that actually care?" Victor felt a surge of pride. "You're talking about a foundation?" Isabel nodded, her confidence growing with every word. "You always say you have more money than you need, and I know what it's like to be alone with no one. We could really make a difference." That night, after they returned from the shelter, Victor and Isabel sat at the kitchen table with notebooks, outlining what would become the Lancaster Family Reunification Foundation. He contributed his knowledge of organizational structures and legal requirements, while Isabel provided insights no highly paid consultant could, those of a child who had experienced the system from the inside. Over the following weeks, as the plan took shape, Victor made major changes in his professional life. He delegated more responsibilities, turned down expansions that would consume all his time, and even, much to the board's shock, suggested a vice president take over daily operations. "I'm not abandoning the company," he explained at the tense board meeting. "I'm ensuring its sustainability while also expanding our social impact." Many outside observers thought the changes drastic. Business media speculated about health issues or secret strategic maneuvers. Few understood the real transformation. For the first time, Victor was defining success on his own terms, not by industry standards or others' expectations. Meanwhile, Isabel thrived. Her grades, initially modest due to her lost years, improved steadily. But more than that, she was growing socially. The girl who once trusted no adult now had a small circle of friends and took an active part in school projects. "Ms. Thompson suggested I think about science competitions next year," Isabel said over dinner, her eyes shining with excitement. "She says I have real potential." "She's absolutely right," Victor agreed. With Christmas approaching, the first they'd spent together since the orphanage, both felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Holidays often magnified joys and sorrows in equal measure. "How did we celebrate when we were little?" Isabel asked one evening, while they decorated a tree they'd picked out together. Victor searched the memories now flowing more freely. At the orphanage, there weren't many gifts, but the caregivers tried to make it special. There was hot chocolate and everyone sang carols. "What about before that, with our parents?" she pressed. Victor closed his eyes, focusing on older, hazier memories. "Mom made gingerbread cookies. Dad always left a special gift under the tree for each of us on Christmas Eve." Together, they decided to blend these rediscovered traditions into their own, adding new ones unique to them. They'd make cookies using the old family recipe Victor had tracked down. They'd donate toys and books to a shelter. On Christmas Eve, they'd exchange one special gift and save the rest for Christmas morning. The week before Christmas, the Lancaster Foundation was officially registered. Its first project would be a digital tracking system to help locate family members of children in orphanages and shelters, combining Nexus Tech's expertise with the philanthropic mission that now drove the siblings. "You know, I used to measure success by quarterly reports," Victor remarked on the night they finalized the foundation's paperwork. "By stock prices, acquisitions, headlines in business magazines." "And now?" Isabel asked, watching him closely. Victor smiled, reflecting on the extraordinary journey they'd been on this past year. "Now I see that real success is this: connection, purpose, making a genuine difference. It's knowing we're not alone. Like a family," Isabel said, the word no longer burdened by pain or uncertainty. "Exactly like a family," Victor agreed. That night, as snow fell softly outside, the Lancaster siblings put the finishing touches on what was perhaps their most significant joint project. Not just the foundation or the business, but the ongoing, patient reconstruction of the bond lost so long ago. Real success, they were learning, couldn't be measured by balance sheets or headlines. It was in these small shared moments, in scars turning into strengths, in the daily rediscovery of what it meant to belong. A world map spread across the entire dining table, with colored stickers marking possible destinations. Seated side by side, Victor and Isabel debated where to take their first vacation together. "Costa Rica has amazing rainforests," Victor suggested, pointing to the small Central American country. "We could see sloths and toucans." "But Japan has those super-fast bullet trains and giant robots," Isabel countered, eyes gleaming with excitement. Victor smiled, amazed at how much his sister had grown over the past months. The suspicious street girl was now confidently discussing international travel plans, her curiosity about the world growing along with her sense of security. "Why not do both?" he proposed. "Costa Rica this summer, Japan in the winter break." Isabel gave him a mock suspicious look. "That's not fair. You're using your big business negotiation tactics on me." "Maybe," Victor said with a laugh, "but it's a genuine idea. We have plenty of time to explore the world together, one place at a time." As they pored over travel details, Isabel noticed Victor's open laptop, where lines of code for a new Nexus project filled the screen. "What's all that?" she asked, leaning closer. "An algorithm for the Foundation's new tracking system," he explained. "We're creating a program to spot patterns and connections in the fragmented records from different adoption agencies." To his surprise, Isabel didn't lose interest at the technical explanation. Instead, she leaned in more, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Like a digital puzzle," she observed, piecing together clues to find families. "Exactly." In the days that followed, Isabel peppered Victor with questions about programming and technology. He answered patiently, impressed by how quickly she picked up complex concepts. "We could build something together," he suggested one evening, after a particularly productive lesson. "The small project for you to practice." Isabel's eyes lit up. "Could it be something for the Foundation?" "Absolutely." On a rainy Sunday, they sat side by side in Victor's study, creating a simple app to help kids in shelters maintain digital memories, photos, stories, important milestones that would stay with them no matter how many times they moved. "I lost so many things every time I changed shelters," Isabel explained as they worked. "Photos, drawings, little souvenirs. If I'd had something like this..." Victor felt the familiar combination of pride and pain, hearing Isabel turn her hardships into constructive ideas. The Lancaster Foundation had grown quickly over the past months, with 3 main projects already underway. The family tracking system, a mentorship program for teens aging out of foster care, and now this memory app Isabel had dreamed up. "You have a natural knack for spotting needs others miss," Victor said as she elegantly solved a coding problem even he hadn't seen. "I learned by watching you," she replied simply. One afternoon after school, Isabel surprised Victor by arriving with 2 friends, Maya and Zoe, girls she'd occasionally mentioned but never brought home. "We need the kitchen table for our science project," she announced casually, as if inviting friends over was something she'd always done. Victor nodded, trying to hide how moved he was by the significance of that moment. The once intimidating penthouse now reverberated with teenage voices, laughter, and the cheerful chaos of an erupting baking soda volcano. Later, after the girls had gone, Victor found Isabel cleaning up the mess. "They seem great," he commented, helping her sweep up the white powder coating the floor. "Maya wants to be a doctor," Isabel answered. "Zoe's amazing at art. She's teaching me how to draw better." The ease with which Isabel spoke about her friends, the way she allowed herself to connect, another silent milestone in her journey toward healing. It was after a particularly long meeting with foundation lawyers that Victor finally addressed a topic he'd been considering for weeks. "I've been thinking," he said during dinner. "Legally, I'm just your temporary guardian right now. If you agree, I'd like to make it permanent, a formal adoption." Isabel paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "But we're blood siblings. Can you adopt me?" "Technically, yes. It's a legal formality ensuring no one can ever separate us again," Victor explained. "But it's just an option. We don't need to change anything if you don't want to." Isabel mulled it over, rolling her food around on her plate. "Would I still be Isabel Lancaster?" "Of course. Nothing changes who we are to each other. It just adds legal protection." "Then let's do it," she decided. "If it means we're together for good, I want that." Their conversation naturally shifted to long-term plans. Victor mentioned possibly expanding the foundation internationally. Isabel talked about her growing interest in technology and maybe studying computer science in the future. "Sometimes I think about the future and I'm not scared anymore," she admitted. "I used to only think about the next day, the next meal. Now I make plans for years ahead." The realization hit Victor. This was perhaps the truest sign of healing, being able to picture and invest in a future without being overwhelmed by trauma. "What do you see in your own future?" Isabel asked. Victor considered. A year ago, his answer would have been automatic. More expansion, more acquisitions, more corporate success. Now his horizons felt both narrower and infinitely broader. "I want to see you grow up and fulfill your dreams," he answered honestly. "I want our foundation to truly change lives for kids like us. I want to keep building something meaningful together." On the table between them, aside from dinner leftovers, lay plans for the Costa Rica trip, sketches for their new app, a calendar marking the upcoming adoption hearing, tangible fragments of the future they were forging. "We're doing okay, right?" Isabel asked softly. "As a family, I mean." "We're just getting started," Victor said, placing his hand over hers. "But yes, I think we're doing incredibly well." That night, long after Isabel went to bed, Victor stayed up reflecting on their remarkable journey. The girl he'd first seen digging through trash, the sister he thought he'd lost forever, was now sleeping safely under his roof, dreaming about baking soda volcanoes, coding projects, and Costa Rican rainforests. The future, which had once been nothing more than a spreadsheet of corporate goals, now had shape and substance, bright, challenging, and most importantly, shared. One day at a time. The courtroom was almost empty, just as they'd planned. Only the judge, a clerk, the lawyers, and the two Lancaster siblings, a private ceremony for a moment that, while merely a legal formality, carried enormous emotional weight for both of them. Victor adjusted his tie, feeling more nervous than in any billion-dollar negotiation he'd ever led. Isabel stood by his side, smoothing the wrinkles in her navy blue dress, picked out carefully for the occasion, a piece that symbolized her transformation from wary street child to a confident preteen who gave the judge a shy smile. "I understand this is an unusual case," Judge Ramirez said, scanning the documents. "Biological siblings, with one adopting the other." "Yes, Your Honor," Victor's lawyer responded, "but as we've explained, the exceptional circumstances justify this measure." The judge nodded, peering over his glasses at Isabel. "Ms. Lancaster, you're 11 now, old enough for your opinion to carry weight in this process. Do you understand what's happening today?" Isabel stood straighter, her voice surprisingly strong. "Yes, sir. My brother is adopting me so no one can ever take us apart again." "And that's what you want?" "More than anything," she said without hesitation. The judge smiled, a warm expression replacing his official stoicism. I've presided over hundreds of adoptions in my 30 years on this bench. Each represents a new beginning, a family choosing to form or grow out of love and commitment. He paused, closing the file briefly. But rarely have I seen a story like yours, separated by the system, reunited by fate, now formalizing a bond that, in truth, was never really broken. Victor felt a lump in his throat as the judge went on. The past 12 months had upended his life in ways he could never have foreseen that rainy night, when a girl he didn't recognize took his hand and told him he'd abandoned her. "Please stand for the final decree," the clerk instructed. Victor and Isabel got to their feet, side by side. Their hands found each other automatically between them. "Having reviewed the documents and heard the relevant testimonies, I hereby declare that as of this moment, Victor Thomas Lancaster is the legal adoptive parent of Isabel Marie Lancaster, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The judge smiled. "Though I must note that in practice, you'll remain siblings just as nature intended." With a tap of the gavel, it was done. A legal technicality transformed into an emotional triumph, ensuring that the system which once tore them apart would never do so again. "Congratulations," the judge said, stepping down to shake Victor's hand and offer Isabel a warm smile. "You two have come a long way." Stepping out of the courtroom into the bright spring morning, Victor turned to look at his sister, now, legally, his daughter as well, though both knew their true relationship transcended any legal definition. "So what now?" Isabel asked, squinting in the sunlight. "Now," Victor answered, "we celebrate our way." There was no lavish party, no over-the-top celebration like the ones that used to mark Victor's significant life events. Instead, following Isabel's preference, they drove to the ocean, a peaceful beach they'd discovered a few months before. As they walked barefoot along the sand, Victor reflected on how drastically life had changed over the past year. Nexus Tech thrived under shared leadership that let him balance professional and personal responsibilities. The Lancaster Foundation exceeded his early expectations, having already reunited 17 children with relatives who thought they were lost forever. But the deepest changes were in the two people now settled on the sand, sharing a simple picnic while watching the waves. "Remember the day we met?" Isabel asked, nibbling on a sandwich. "I was terrified and so angry. I was completely lost," Victor admitted, "not even aware of what I was missing." Isabel smiled, an open, radiant smile that had taken months to appear regularly. It was no longer the guarded expression of a child on guard, but that of someone who finally felt safe enough to share her happiness. "Guess what?" she said, abruptly changing the subject in that quicksilver way of an 11-year-old. "I got first place at the regional science fair. My ecosystem mapping app is going to the state competition next month." "Oh, really?" "I've only heard you mention it about 17 times since yesterday," Victor teased, dodging a playful wad of napkins she threw his way. Isabel's natural aptitude for technology had blossomed over the past year. What started as curiosity about Victor's work grew into genuine passion. She not only learned basic programming but applied it creatively, astonishing even the senior engineers at Nexus. Her social circle also grew significantly. From a girl who couldn't trust any adult, Isabel now had a tight-knit group of friends, participated in her school's science club, and had even taken up swimming lessons. An initial fear of water replaced by enthusiasm through patient instruction. "Dr. Martinez says we don't need weekly sessions anymore," Isabel commented, drawing random shapes in the sand with her finger. "Does that mean we're all better now?" Victor pondered. "I don't think all better is the right phrase. Maybe we're changed, stronger because of our scars, instead of held back by them." Isabel nodded. "I still have nightmares sometimes," she admitted quietly. "But now when I wake up, I know right away where I am. And I know you'll be there if I call." "Always," Victor promised, feeling both the weight and the honor of that simple truth. After lunch, they decided to build a sandcastle, apparently a childish activity, but one they discovered was surprisingly therapeutic. Victor, used to designing corporate towers of glass and steel, applied the same meticulous focus to sculpting turrets out of wet sand. Isabel, using her hard-earned street smarts, found clever ways to reinforce fragile structures. "Did you know? The orphanage records said we used to do this when we were little," Victor remarked as they worked. "Apparently our parents took us to the beach in the summer, and we built sandcastles. It was a family thing." Isabel froze, a decorative shell poised in the air. "Really? I don't remember that. You were too young, but I have fragments now. Our dad always insisted on adding a moat." They worked in silence for a bit, both processing this newly recovered link to a past that had long been buried. "We could add a moat now," Isabel suggested, her casual tone failing to hide the emotion beneath. So they did, expanding their initial castle to incorporate this piece of shared history, a symbolic bridge between what they'd lost and what they had rebuilt. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation moved freely among various topics. Victor's plans to extend the foundation to Mexico next year, Isabel's summer project exploring artificial intelligence, the possibility of adopting a dog, still under debate and with Isabel passionately in favor, and Victor voicing practical concerns. "I never thought I'd have this," Isabel said suddenly, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. "A normal life, a future. Is it normal to worry it's all going to vanish?" Victor asked. "Like we'll wake up and find it was just a dream?" Isabel nodded. "Dr. Martinez said it's common for people who've been through extreme trauma, then extreme happiness. It takes time for the brain to accept that good things can last." "When did you get so wise?" Victor teased, once again impressed by her emotional maturity. "I've always been wise," she answered with a playful grin. "I just took a while to notice." The sun was starting to set when they finished their castle and decided to top it with a makeshift flag, a stick with a leaf tied to it. As a final touch, Isabel picked up a shell and carefully etched into the damp sand at the base, "Lancaster Rebuilt 2023. Victor took in the inscription, feeling its profound significance. "Perfect," he said, voice a bit tight with emotion. They sat side by side, gazing at their creation as gentle waves advanced. There was no rush to shield it from the incoming tide. There was a kind of peace in allowing the structure to be reclaimed by the ocean, in contrast to the permanent bond it symbolized. "Victor," Isabel said, breaking their reflective silence. "Yes, thanks for finding me." Victor smiled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Actually, you found me, remember?" Isabel leaned against him, accepting the hug with the ease that had taken months to develop. "I guess we found each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden rays across the water, the sandcastle finally met the first gentle waves. Rather than resist the inevitable, the siblings watched in peaceful acceptance as the structure gradually returned to the sea. "We can always build another one tomorrow," Isabel said. "Maybe even bigger." "Definitely bigger," Victor agreed. "And stronger." They stayed on the beach until the last glow of daylight faded and the sky became a blanket of stars. The future stretched out before them, no longer a terrifying unknown or a spreadsheet of corporate targets, but a horizon of possibilities they would face together. The sandcastle was gone, yet what it represented remained: a family rebuilt, a bond restored, and the certainty that some connections, no matter how tested by time and circumstances, refuse to be permanently broken. Back in the car, Isabel dozed off in the passenger seat, her face peaceful in a dreamless sleep. Victor drove calmly along the coastal road, taking his sister home, not merely his extravagant penthouse, but the true home they'd built together. In the rearview mirror, he could just make out the distant beach where their sandcastle had stood briefly, but that was enough. Some things don't need physical permanence to leave an everlasting mark. The future waited, a fresh chapter ready to be written. Not perfect, certainly with its own challenges, but to be faced together, exactly as it should have been all along.